Entering 2023, I started to study film, and one big goal that I had for this year was to rank and review every single movie that I watched for the first time. And here it is. Here is my ranking of my top 10 favorite movies I watched in 2023. Throughout 2023, we had films that were dumb, brilliant, that were nostalgic, and that were surprisingly good. And the question is, did they make it into my top 10? Before we jump into it, I do have to mention that it's not just the 2023 releases. It is also movies that I watched for the first time. So as an example, one movie I watched for the first time is 2001: A Space Odyssey. Now, that is not in the top 10 list, but that's an example of a movie that might be in there. So I'm going to get into all the spoilers and into all that kind of stuff. So if there's a movie you haven't watched, please pause and come back once you're ready. Now that's out of the way, let's look at my top 10 of the 71 movies that I watched this year for the first time. Since Last Night in Soho's release, I've been weighing should I watch it or not, because I personally hate horror films and can't handle the very much the demonic kind of side of horror films, and I love Edgar Wright. He's my favourite director of all time, so it became very difficult, but when it dropped on Netflix in Australia, I jumped on it instantly. I knew I had to watch it. And what I found from this film was rich and beautiful storytelling, cinematography, acting, and lighting. It was magnificent, just what I love Edgar Wright for. I love the step into lucid dreaming and the theory that he brings kind of behind it, that it transports you into the history of the room and the atmosphere that you are around. There's all these different theories, and I think that's one that's very abnormal and is quite interesting to look into. The film shows the true face of things that happened in the 1960s against Eloise's nostalgic view on it as she goes into Sandy's mind back in that time period. The use of mirrors and the red and blue light just creates a beautiful dreamscape of the 1960s that gets you entrapped in Soho itself. And I do have to mention the beautiful mirror scenes and in the dance scene and how that was all shot, which is absolutely masterfully beautiful, and just I could not put it at my number 10 in my list. I can't say much about this film that hasn't already been said. I mean, Everything Everywhere All at Once swept the awards that year. And my biggest take from this film is the raw dialogue and all these emotions that make you feel all these different things no matter who you are. The scene that left me a sobbing mess here in my living room was a scene with Raymond. I relate so much to his character. He is a man who is just in love with a woman, a kind-hearted fellow who wants nothing but the best for everyone, who doesn't care what he's doing with his life and just wants to be with Evelyn. That whole scene of In Another Life just absolutely broke me and made me cry because I relate to his character so deeply. Also, in the rock scene with Evelyn and Joy, I just love how we are just seeing text, but we still feel all these emotions that even though it's a dumb scene, it still makes us so invested in it and invested in these two little rocks. Obviously, those two rocks are Evelyn and Joy, but I find that it's so fascinating that the filmmakers were able to make us film everything, everywhere, all at once, making this movie live up to the title, which makes it so perfect. And not only that, but it was the second film that I watched in 2023, and it made such a lasting impact it came my number 9. This year was the first time in my life that I actually stepped into horror. I watched mild horror very much, like Last Night in Soho, A Quiet Place, this movie, and the Scream franchise. A Quiet Place explored perfectly how silence is so scary, how silence can be used so effectively in movies, how even hearing the grains of sand underneath the feet of the characters makes you on edge. My biggest problem with this film had nothing to do with the film actually itself, was the fact that it got spoiled that Lee would die and he would sacrifice himself. So it ruined a lot of the stakes for me. I would say that this film is fantastic, and the reason why I rank it this high is because I loved it so much. But I feel like if I was to be a bit more realistic, it would be lower on my list, just for the fact that the part that is gets you most emotionally invested is the part that was spoiled for me. I have to say that the opening really shook me. Just this big reveal of this monster, this alien, that it kills a child, really makes you on edge for the rest of the film. And I love how even I am holding my breath, being afraid to make any noise. as if it's going to influence the world in the movie, which is so important that a movie gets you invested in this universe. And the sound design just carries this film, and it is just so perfect, so masterfully crafted. Like, John Krasinski is such a brilliant director and writer. I honestly can't get over how I've fallen in love with some aspects of horror, with 3 films making it into my top 10. That's actually insane. As a white Australian that knows what percentage I am of Chinese Singapore, I feel like I can't say too much about a movie like Get Out. The parts that I will mention is how this film really influences the fears and the real life stuff that African Americans have to go through. The scariness of some white suburbs and stuff like that. It really makes you feel and empathize for them because you are afraid of what is happening on screen. Jordan Peele seals himself as a fantastic director, even with this as his first film. I still have yet to see Us and Nope, but this really just blows my mind on how good he is as a director. Not only that, but he casted perfectly. Daniel Kaluuya, Alison Williams, and Lakeith Stanfield are obviously the parts that really stood out to me the most, but my goodness, they did such a good job, and it was casted so perfectly. And the twist, man, that shook me to my core. I love this whole idea that Peele took what we expected and just twisted it in a unique way that, even if it is dumb, just is so good. And as we saw these advanced individuals and we found that out, I was genuinely scared. I think advanced individuals is the best way to say it. I don't know. Django Unchained is a movie that just took me completely out of my comfort zone. I honestly didn't feel super comfortable watching it, but I think that's such a good and important part of the movie. The fact that I felt so uneasy gave me a proper view of what life was then and how much we have changed as humans. It opened my eyes to the things that slaves had to go through back then and the aggression that was towards the Africans. It just made me hurt on the inside as well, which is so perfect. And I think it's something that the filmmakers really wanted to make us feel, was this uncomfy feeling, an uneasy feeling, as a white guy that is. Just like what I said for Get Out, I feel like I can't say too much. The last thing that I will say is Leonardo DiCaprio, he seemed too comfortable in that role. That's all I'm saying. Now this film is perfection. Oh my goodness, I loved it so much. This kind of writing and this kind of storytelling is what I want to do in my future career. And if it wasn't for mostly enjoyment, I reckon it would be my number 1, if not very, very close. Obviously 5 is high, but I'm talking like a 1, 2, or 3. Just like the other films in this list, I have no better way of explaining it than it shook me to my core. I am always a huge fan of films that are mostly based in one location. You have films like Room that just really stood out to me, and this movie, Reservoir Dogs, is one that just shines so true. This gave me a lot of respect for Tarantino, especially when his line from Pulp Fiction kind of took it down, and Django Unchained kind of made it a bit uneasy, like the movie itself. I want to mention how good the characters are and how they all flow perfectly. Obviously there's a part to the actors, but there's also a massive thing to the writing. The writing is so beautiful, how all these characters feel so unique and so strong in their foundations. A lot of films have that, but then a lot of films also don't. And it makes it a bit disappointing. I mean, especially look at Steve Buscemi. He did such a good job. I wasn't expecting that from a guy that's in Adam Sandler movies. Oppenheimer, Reservoir Dogs, and Django are all movies that are kind of on the same level in my opinion. In this list, you could easily transition those in different spots. They're only in that order because of recency bias. And they're all in that for really good reasons. Django for its uneasiness, Reservoir Dogs for its acting and writing, and Oppenheimer for its impact and direction. Now, I wasn't expecting to see such a good cast, and especially my favourite older brother in this movie. I love how Christopher Nolan casted so perfectly, and he felt like he cared about not only the actors, but the characters themselves. With each one that was in the movie, had their scene of importance, had their shot where they stood out. If it was the actor for Roderick, him vomiting, or if it was Josh Peck pressing the button. Every single character had such an important part to play. Now, as you will soon see as we get further into my list, I am Christian, and those scenes made me feel uneasy, that's for sure. But I really like how they have proper meaning. A lot of films nowadays, they actually just have those kind of scenes for the sake of having those kind of scenes. If it's in Eternals or anything like that, it feels like there's no proper meaning. Well, there was a ton of symbolism behind these scenes. Especially the one in the room where Emily Blunt and Florence Pugh's characters are looking at each other. I felt every ounce of pain that was in Emily Blunt's character. Well shot, well acted, well written. There's nothing else that I can say other than that Christopher Nolan is probably the best director of all time. Films that have real emotion in them, that are raw and that are never really brought up, often are some of the best films. This is the same with The Last Wish. Not only does it grab the good things from the original, but it also helps you forget the bad things from the original. It brings in a new animation style, it brings in new characters, with only the two returning ones being Kitty Softpaws and Puss in Boots. My favourite part of this film is something that a lot of people talk about, and it's how everyone gets their wish. I mean, look at Puss. He wants more lives so he can live longer, so he can have more life. He's just trying to escape death. And death as well. And in the end, he actually gains another life. He gains one of freedom, one of love, one around friends, one around family, one where he goes back to inevitably be in Shrek 5 as a super duper caring person, not just a swashbuckling cat in boots. It's an excellent movie that makes you afraid of a whistle and that has the smoothest transitions between animations that I have the utmost respect for. Now I can hear you saying, oh, obviously the Christian is going to put Jesus Revolution as his number 2. Yes, that is true, but there is reasons as to why I actually put it this high. The film encapsulates so many things that Christians deal with. The highs, the lows, the awkwardness of some things. By awkwardness, I mean the scene that Lonnie interrupts Chuck. Now, as a non-Christian watching this movie, you may be like, why is Chuck interrupting Lonnie? Isn't something that everyone wants his healing? Well, there's actually so much more to that, and it's something that is so realistic that I've even seen firsthand. The thing is what is behind Lonnie stepping out. Throughout this film, we get to see Lonnie kind of become more egotistical and more central on him being the front runner. Now, when Chuck goes back and takes that position that he has had this whole time, Lonnie feels like he has to be there. He doesn't like it that someone else is taking over. Instead of him stepping out to really help get healing for people, it's just for himself. And that is something that I have seen in church. All these kinds of things where they show the good and the bad of the church, I love it because it actually feels so realistic. Not only does it show a good representation of what baptism feels like, it shows the nitty-gritty of behind the scenes that it can be sometimes in leadership. As a leader, you should be like Chuck, 100%. And as a member, you should be like Greg. Honorable mentions. I have to mention some movies. There's some that came out this year that you might even be mad that are not in my list so far. So here are some honorable mentions. A Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. The animation is outstanding in that film. The fact that they made a new thing for Spider-Punk is so brilliant. Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest. I love it. It's so fun. It's so enjoyable to watch. Birdman. Far out, that's so good. And man, does Emma Stone have huge eyes. John Wick Chapter 4. The punches in that movie made me shake in my seat in the cinema. That first punch genuinely scared me so much. And Room. Brie Larson is such a brilliant actress. That was my number 11. I loved that movie so much. It just didn't get in. I watched 10 films in the cinema this year, and 2 of them were Guardians 3. This movie really just stood out to me and was such a big staple for films that I loved throughout this year. It made me feel something that not many films actually help you feel as an audience. I do want to mention James Gunn's quote about character deaths. It is all a function of story. I try not to have people that die and are just there to service another character. It has to work as part of the story. I would never have killed Yondu just to kill Yondu. It had to be intimately involved with the story, and I didn't want to kill Yondu. You know, Peter Quill has to lose this character in his life, and Yondu has to sacrifice his life. He has to come through. This is his redemption, and he can only do that by sacrificing his life. So I knew it was the right ending for the story, and I'm always in service of that. That attitude is so important and vital to storytelling, and the fact that Guardians didn't have any major character deaths just shows how good of a writer James Gunn is. That is perfection of craft. You were there, you're expecting someone to die. When Drax gets shot, you're like, this is the end for him. When Nebula, Drax, and Mantis are all suffocating as they go into space, that's the end. Where Star-Lord jumps off the ship into an exploding planet, you're like, that's the end for his character. But the fact is that none of them died, and none of it really felt like you missed out on someone dying. My only complaint is Star-Lord at the end. I feel like they didn't have to have that scene of him almost dying. But I really do value that he made Adam Warlock save him, because it's a redemption arc for Adam Warlock. I really like the start in Guardians 1, 2, and Infinity War. We are hit with a lovely song, a happy-go-lucky song, but then we are hit with something completely different in Guardians 3, changing our whole tempo. We see these people at their lowest, and I think Quill and Nebula are two really good examples of that. We see all these characters that we know are expendable throughout this whole film, but we don't want to let them go. We've become so attached to each and every one of them. We want what's best for them, but we never want to see them leave the screen, which is why you are just so kind of heartbroken, but you're also happy when you see everyone dancing that the dog days are over, and we see some characters go off to reach their full potential, their destiny. Some go out to see who they are outside of the Guardians. It's such a beautiful love letter to the characters and a goodbye that I think honestly should be a goodbye to the Guardians and not for any more Guardians movies to happen, especially with Marvel at its state right now. Well, this is my top 10 list of the year, and I hope you really enjoyed it. If you guys want to see more videos like this, I'll do more if it obviously gets more views and gets more likes. Though I feel like if I'm going to do my top 10 of all time, it's going to have to be in 2 parts. But I mean, Jesus Revolution is up there, just prepping you, so that part will be very short. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you made it this far to the end.